Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Tuesday, March 3rd, 2026. It occurred to me earlier this morning. I don't remember if I guess I could go and check this. Did I do tell you what day it was yesterday? I'm pretty sure I told you it was Monday. You knew anyway, and I don't know. Just one of those weird obsessions that I suddenly get every once in a while. Things in disarray, as you might expect, it being maybe sort of kind of wartime and all. White House, I think, officially continues to deny that there's a war going on, but enjoys themselves nonetheless. And also denies, I guess, that we're running out of munitions. But to the extent that we are, it's Ukraine's fault for having a war before us and taking up all of those munitions that Congress voted to send your way for, defense against expanding Russian empire. But we're not against that anymore in the Trump administration, so I guess it's a big mystery to him. Also, I guess reports coming in from overseas that our supposed allies, and I mean, so far they seem to be holding up their end of the bargain, are running low themselves on munitions. And this is something actually I think came up at some point prior to this round of attacks on Iran, and I don't remember what the context was, though it was probably something similar, given that, we tend to do this sort of thing with some regularity, which was that it's awfully cheap these days to take up the attention. I think we were talking Golden Dome, right, at that point, but to take up the attention span and, of course, the munitions as well, of any power who has this sort of aerial self-defense capability. It's very expensive. These missiles that can lock in on these tiny targets and track them down and knock them out of the sky, and very inexpensive by comparison to flood the zone with drones. Not meant to be a rhyme there, but I guess it works. Some drones more expensive than others, of course. And but at any rate, compared to the missiles that knock them out of the sky, particularly the Patriot missiles, those types of things, the balance of payments is off. We have a trade imbalance. We need to impose tariffs on the attackers in order to even things out. And so as it happens, socked away in Instapaper somewhere, I'll have to scroll around and find it, is the word from Middle East Eye. That's the publication. And there's a lot of eyes going on out there in the Middle East. And this is one of them, middleeasteye.net, if you want to find them online. U.S. allegedly, it is, I will add here, allegedly, but probably, yeah, we're doing this. Stonewalling, that's in scare quotes. U.S. stonewalling requests by Gulf states to replenish interceptors, sources say. Now, ordinarily, there's a little bit of light talk and conversation going on in the morning before we get right down to business. But I don't know. This one's on my mind, and this is the morning news as I read Trump's social media postings for the morning. I didn't bother grabbing copies as people kindly transport them over to Blue Sky from Truth Social of his complaining. But I guess, note to self, if I would ever leave my pencil in the same place for 2 days in a row, it would be a lot easier to make this note. But, if you haven't found it, I'll try and grab a copy of it. And there's, I think, more than one of him complaining about, one, complaining that Ukraine has taken up all the missiles, and two, that don't worry about it. We have, supplies, and we can do wars forever, even though we promised, coming into office, no more forever wars. But don't worry about it. We can do it. We just don't want to do it. But we also do want to do it. And that's also, war is peace, peace is war. That's the way it goes. So the U.S. is apparently stonewalling requests by Gulf states to replenish interceptors, sources say. And guess who those sources are? They are Gulf states. So there you go. Now you know it's true. One Gulf state, and by which we mean Persian Gulf state, not Gulf of whatever you call it here, Gulf of America if you're Google Maps and you give in, but rather Gulf of Persia, which we should change the name of that too. I mean, why not? We're at war. What the hell else are they going to get mad at, right? That's Gulf of America also. What do you think of that? One Gulf state sought reassurances on the U.S. commitment to its air defense when discussing access to bases, sources say. So it's not just a matter of these countries saying, well, you gave us missiles and now I want you to give us more missiles, like for free or whatever it is. Remember, you are currently actively using air bases in this country to launch your attacks against Iran. Now, the price of that happens to be also our cities get bombarded, which also kind of sucks for them. But also our bases, which then sucks for them because I guess they have to pay for the water to put out the fires. But we have to, of course, dodge the missiles and hope that nobody gets hit. And so far, we've been pretty lucky, but not everybody gets out of harm's way. So we're all paying for it, in terms of retaliation. But it's not just like, hey, give us missiles. You're also asking our permission to participate in the attack from our territory. Sean Matthews wrote this thing for Middle East Eye, and it tells the story this way. It's not a long story. The U.S. is, quote, stonewalling requests by some Gulf states, and I'm not sure exactly what that means. Is it not answering, or are they, to me, stonewalling means giving, making responses but non-answers, or saying I'll get back to you, or I got to talk to my manager or something like that, versus ghosting, which is just I'm not answering. I don't know. I don't think they use ghosting in the newspapers yet. Anyway, the U.S. is stonewalling requests by some Gulf states to replenish their air defense interceptors as pressure mounts on them to join the U.S. and Israel in their war on Iran, which I guess diplomatically is going to be a tall order. I know there's more close cooperation via Jared Kushner, the Middle East envoy allegedly from the United States, but maybe just also living in Dubai along with the various other influencers. No reports really that he's living in Dubai, of course. But at any rate, it's a tall order for Arab states, Muslim states, to openly declare, we're aligning with Israel against, granted, a Shia Muslim state, but a Muslim state nonetheless in Iran. It's, it invites problems. We'll say that. At any rate, Gulf states are saying they need extra replenishment of their air defense interceptors as pressure mounts on them to join in this war on Iran, but actively, I guess, with fighter pilots, etc. One Western official and one former U.S. official familiar with the matter told this to Middle East Eye. At least one Gulf state that has come under attack from Iran asked U.S. officials about replenishing supplies that have been depleted since the joint U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran, but was brushed off, the former U.S. official familiar with the discussion said. Oh my. In a separate case, another Gulf state responded to U.S. requests to use air bases in their country with inquiries about the U.S.'s commitment to their air defense systems. A Western official familiar with the matter told MEE, Middle East Eye, but the former U.S. official familiar with the conversation in the administration told MEE that Gulf states would be left wanting if they expect new supplies of interceptors. Ho-ho, make them yourself. Teach a man to fish, right? Okay, well, I don't know. But apparently, you can't rely on the Trump administration to honor the promises of previous administrations or his own previous administration, if that's who made the promise. I don't care. It doesn't matter. It's all off now. You're on your own. We need them. We need them for our own defense. I'm not certain what the excuse is, but it's another lesson in dealing with the Trump administration, of course. Whatever munitions were produced in the last couple of months, this is probably true. We have shot several years' worth of production in the last few days, the former official said. They probably shouldn't be saying this, but there it is. And you had to guess that it was the truth. Saudi Arabia, or Saudish Arabia, as we call it here, because it's owned by the Saud family. We should remind everybody. Kuwait, for which I saw an alternative spelling the other day that I thought was interesting. We here in the United States usually spell it Kuwait, and I think I saw Kouweit, giving a hint that maybe there's a better and accented way of saying perhaps Kuwait as opposed to Kuwait. I don't know. Anyway, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain have all been targeted with Iranian ballistic missiles and drones, but the countries closest to Iran, that's Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE, have borne the brunt of the assaults. Qatar announced on Monday that it shot down 2 Iranian Su-24 fighter jets. So, I don't know, we blame the Russians for those, I guess. The UAE said on Monday it had destroyed 814 of the 871 drones, ballistic missiles, and cruise missiles fired at it since Saturday. Now, I guess that's not too bad. 814 less making impact in their territory. That sounds good. But again, you sort of see the problem. You just sort of flood the zone. 871 things fired at you. They'll knock down 814 of them, but, well, the rest of them, I guess, get through. And that's a pretty good success rate. Now, this is something new and interesting to me. I didn't know this, and I don't know if I could verify it as fact, but the claim here is that as a general rule, defenders are expected, or at least perhaps they expect, to fire 2 to 3 interceptors to down an incoming missile. I don't know whether they fire multiple times at like tiny little drones or something like that, but I guess anything that poses a pretty big explosive threat. I guess you want to make sure you hit it. Double, triple tap, I guess, as the kids in the video games would say. But if each one of those interceptors takes, months longer to produce and costs millions of dollars more, you begin to see what the problem is pretty quickly. The UAE operates Terminal High Altitude Area Defense ballistic missile defense systems. That's THAAD, or THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense. Sounds like something to look up. As well as Patriot PAC-3 surface-to-air missile systems. The UAE also has South Korean, Russian, and Israeli air defense systems. I guess that was part of the bargain. As well as a domestic short-range air defense system called Sky Knight, which sounds like it really ought to have some sort of theme song whenever we mention it. We probably have something good in the fanfares somewhere. The UAE's interception rate is above 90%, according to the government's tally, but THAAD and Patriot interceptors are costly and take years to make. And also, by the way, we just had numbers like a minute ago. Can I just interrupt one more time to say 814 out of 871, just based on those missile numbers alone? Yeah, okay, it holds up. I was worried that they were going to say, well, we have a 90% interception rate, even though we just told you that numbers that say we have an 80% interception rate. But that's 93.5%. That's pretty good. But again, just to bring you back to the old discussion we had, I think the first time around when we were talking Golden Dome and harkening back to the days of SDI and saying that even if you had a 99% success rate, one, if you were throwing literally thousands of nuclear warheads at one another, then a 99% success rate still means a significant number of warheads get through. And then those are nuclear warheads. And I mean, you don't even want to get hit by one of those things. They're very nasty. So at any rate, that's a pretty good performance, I must say. But still, you end up getting hit. Thankfully, it's not nuclear warheads. The UAE's interception rate is above 90%, according to the government's tally. But as they said, the interceptors are costly and take years to make. That's really a problem. The UAE has now burned through a significant chunk of an interceptor stockpile that took years to build. Kelly Greco, an expert at the Stimson Center, wrote on X. Well, all right, Stimson Center. I don't know her. Anyway, U.S. President Donald Trump held a phone call with his Emirati counterpart, that's Mohammed bin Zayed on Monday. That's interesting, too. Note to the neo-royalist folks there. The counterpart in that they're both heads of state, yes. Counterpart, elected president, quote-unquote elected president, and king, emir. Well, I don't know. But somebody's got to talk to somebody. And he's one of the cool new Middle Eastern guys that goes by initials. He's MBZ, Mohammed bin Zayed. And we should probably make a practice of saying his surname, too, even though it doesn't define the name of the country he represents the way the Saud family does. But I don't know it offhand, and we'll have to look it up and make sure we know. An Emirati readout of the call said the two discussed the blatant Iranian attacks, that's the quote, on the UAE and other Gulf states. They are blatant. Everyone has seen them. They're on TikTok, if you want to look. All the influencers who moved to Dubai, not just the woman I mentioned the other day, who was a very interesting case, but by the way, there's a whole, I think in the link I gave to Scott, there's a whole thread of influencers who've moved to Dubai doing pro-Dubai. I think they moved to Dubai. I guess they could be doing it remotely. Pro-Dubai content of all kinds. And I understand they're all fleeing the country, of course, and the planes are in short supply. Speaking of planes, there's another note to self thing here, but you know my pencil is gone, so it's going to have to be a mental note, which means it's gone. None of you will get the privilege of finding out what I was thinking of, unless I stumble upon it again. Anyway, back to the article here. Bahrain has said it intercepted and shot down at least 45 ballistic missiles and drones. So you can do the calculations in your head about the price tag on that one. Neither the former U.S. nor Western official, okay, those are the two off-the-record sources they were talking to, said there have been formal denials, but that Gulf states have been discouraged from asking for refills. So it's like a controlled substance. Firas Maqsad, the Middle East director at the Eurasia Group, told MEE, citing U.S. sources, that the USS Gerald R. Ford, the aircraft carrier with wolves on board, now the only one, was leaving the Mediterranean on Monday en route to the Gulf. So, all right. Does that mean anything? It means we'll be arriving with more munitions. It doesn't mean they're going to get any. That movement, though, would suggest that the Trump administration may be trying to address some of the Gulf states' security complaints, which, you know, I'm sure somebody is trying to handle that. Donald Trump is just paying zero attention to it, I am sure. So that's your war update for the moment. I'm sure we'll be returning to it a couple of times from a couple different angles. But if I can divert for just a second, then I can perhaps mention to you what the plane situation was that was in my head. It reminded me of some other story completely separate from this, but we'll just do it by stream of consciousness as we usually do. And so the connective tissue here, planes and plane shortages. I saw an interesting note here via, it originates here with, who are we looking at here? Timothy Burke, Bubba Prague, progressive. Timothy Burke, who makes note here, a journalist who notes it goes even further beyond there. So I could trace you the whole line of provenance here, but a shortage of large passenger charter planes is out there due to the Department of Homeland Security, which is closed, by the way, in its 18th day of shutdown, paying 10 times the usual rates to ferry kidnapped migrants. That heavy usage is threatening the NCAA tournament travel plans. It is, of course, March 3rd now. It's the month of March, and just like the supposed super game of football that we're allowed. I mean, I don't think anybody really cares whether we say Super Bowl. We've done this 100 times, but you're not supposed to, and I think it's funny, and I'm making fun of the whole situation by saying it that way. But you're also not supposed to refer to March Madness, trademark, without, I guess, I don't know, paying somebody for something. But yeah, the big basketball tournament that drives everybody crazy is coming up soon enough. And, you know, it's a large tournament, right? 64 teams, unless they've changed something that I don't know about this year. And that's just one tournament. And then there's the women's tournament. There's a men's tournament and a women's tournament. So 64, 128 teams are going places, at least at the beginning. And there's the NIT, although that's not mentioned in here because it's not the NCAA tournament, but that's happening too. And that's just Division I, and the other you get the idea. Lots of travel has to happen for basketball teams, and a lot of them all pretty much at the same time. And they can't get planes because the DHS has sucked them all up for moving migrants around the country, whether to deport them or just to move them out of a jurisdiction where there might be a sympathetic judge who might grant their habeas corpus petition, whatever it is. And this is pointing to, I guess, originally, wow, this goes even further back, Matt Norlander says here, senior writer and talking head for CBS Sports, because he's going to stay at CBS too. That's odd. Too bad. Anyway, maybe CBS Sports isn't under Barry Weiss's charge. Here's the story on it. He says, interested to see if they have any headlines pop 14, 15, 16 days from now about travel issues. Hopefully not. NCAA trying to get out in front of this. It's CBS Sports headline. NCAA memo to membership warns against potential travel logjam with aircrafts for upcoming March Madness. They said it, not me. Events. And when the brackets are released on March 15th, the logistics of promptly flying all teams to NCAA tournament sites could be bumpy. Oh, in for turbulence. Get it? You see? Well, that's an interesting point in itself. And another interesting point Kevin Cruz made here, saying this may seem trivial to people who use the word sports ball, as we do online. But remember that for many Americans, the events that finally drove home the severity of COVID was the cancellation of March Madness. Yes, that is an excellent political point. And as Mike, is your last name Habeger or Habeger? I'm not certain. But Mike points out here that this is something I've been going on about at some length. That is to say, the idea of the sports being the indicator, the first indication that many Americans get that something serious is going on. It's what I used to call President Basketball back in early COVID days, although I was referring to NBA basketball rather than NCAA basketball, but they obviously jumped in and participated as well. But I think it was the tournament wasn't scheduled to start yet, but then of course they suspended it. But the NBA suspended a couple of games a little earlier, just saying, yeah, we can't be responsible for calling people into indoor stadiums and sitting together under these conditions. So President Basketball, that is to say, the Basketball Association was the first one that most people noticed taking a serious approach to the pandemic. Something's going on here, everybody. Your president won't tell you about it. For him, it was about preventing cruise ships from docking, and then pretty soon we'll have 0 cases, and but the event people knew they didn't want to be responsible for this. So yeah, I referred to President Basketball was the only one taking a responsible approach to the pandemic. It was a little bit confusing. People didn't know exactly what I was talking about because, of course, Donald Trump himself looks like a basketball, and they thought I was talking about leathery, a little deflated these days. But that's not what I meant. I meant the actual people over at the basketball associations. So very true. So there you go. That's the other airplane story I have for you today. In other news, airplane, like that's a very childlike way of saying it. Aircraft, I suppose, but airplane is more along the lines of here come your strained peas on an airplane, which I'm pretending a spoon is your airplane. Open up and eat it. That's what's on my mind today, everybody. All right. So a couple other stories that definitely need some attention. Let's head back to the war and tell you this fantastic story. All right, well, this one I'm going to save for after the break. I'll do this short one instead. We mentioned yesterday that it looked like information about the bombardment, the opening bombardment of Iran the other day was a little leaky, and that word may have escaped before anyone, quote unquote, intended them to. And that certain people were perhaps betting on the prediction markets. There was that story. And the insecurity of the fake skiff at Perva-Lago certainly is a story. This is a different one. 4 guys near White House bragging hours before strike. Ellipsis, it was coming. Except that sounds like a weird headline, right? Where is that from? Oh, I'm at TMZ, the gossip and celebrity news site, with the story from the TMZ staff that a group of at a Washington, D.C. restaurant was talking openly in the bar area Friday afternoon about a national secret that was about to literally explode hours later, the bombing of Iran. Attorney Mark Garagos, I am not certain how he pronounces the name, but he was at Joe's Seafood, Prime Steak, and Stone Crab. I usually only hear it referred to as Joe's Stone Crab. At around 3 o'clock on the dot, p.m. Eastern Time, at the bar, getting something to eat and preparing to do the Two Angry Men podcast with Harvey Levin, who I guess is the TMZ founder. I recognize that guy. From his seat in the bar area. They do a podcast at the bar at 3 o'clock. Well, I guess that's permissible. You can be at the bar at 3 o'clock if you're doing a podcast. All right. Just before 3:45, they kept careful track of these things. Mark overheard people at the next table in the bar area talking about Iran. That happens. There were 4 men sitting all together, yet they were all alone at a high top table, and 2 women were standing next to the table and really wanted nothing to do with them. The men were dressed in business attire, sports coats, and collared shirts. Mark says one of the men said in a voice loud enough for him to hear clear, the U.S. was going to bomb Iran today. Hi, everybody. It's me, David, still your host for the Kagro in the Morning Show after all these years. Thank you for all your continuing support for the show. And if you're listening regularly and still thinking about getting on board as a supporter, well, the time is now. Patreon.com is the easiest way to make recurring subscription-style payments every month, all year round, to keep us going. patreon.com/KagroX brings you to our page where you can sign up with your monthly support. And hey, have you seen our clever new subscription tiers? It's easier than ever to sign up for, say, $1 crisp bill for every information-packed 2-hour show. If you're the plan ahead type, there's even a year-long subscription program that saves you 15% on the cover price. Or it would if there was a cover price, or even a cover, for that matter. patreon.com/KAGROX. Thanks again for all your support. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Note from Justice Putnam, by the way, tells me that Garagos, is that how we are going to decide to pronounce his name? I don't know. He doesn't give me a pronunciation guide. He was just letting me know that he was one of O.J. Simpson's lawyers. And I don't remember who O.J. Simpson's lawyers were, but that sounds entirely possible. And I guess it makes sense that he would be doing a TMZ podcast from a bar, given that one of the other O.J. lawyers who got famous, their whole family is famous now for running around and filming themselves for television. The whole Kardashian clan. That I remember. Anyway, so there's a loudmouth or 2 or 4 in the bar area talking loudly enough about we're going to bomb Iran today. And I guess, I don't know who he was talking to, but it was 4 men and 2 women. And I guess they thought that the 2 women might think it was cool to know that Iran was going to be bombed. And they may have even run to the prediction markets to make bets about it. I'm not certain. Or they were just like, whatever. Or, maybe they were Iranian agents. I really can't be sure who they were. Mark's not sure who those guys were, but Joe's is about a quarter of a mile from the White House. It's an interesting way of putting it. Joe's is 0.2 of a mile. That's how it's typed out. From the White House. You hear Harvey, just before they began the podcast, asking why Mark chose that location for the podcast. Oh, I thought it might be their regular place. Mark responded, the conversation next to him was so fascinating he couldn't leave. Where do they normally go? Anyway, later in the podcast, Mark says, by the time this podcast drops, that would be 1 p.m. Eastern time in Iran. And then he pauses and he says, I'll leave it at that. He's actually smarter than the four guys at the table. I don't want to be the one recorded saying this. I don't know how much TMZ podcast they're listening to in Iran. What with them being busy with this one and all. But you never know. Anyhow, Mark then reveals what he overheard. Quote, today is the day. Sure enough, hours later, the U.S. and Israel were bombing Iran. Although, I mean, I guess there's a fair chance that any day you say that could be true. But it's not always true. It's a good bet. But that's what prediction markets are for, which is to say nothing. Making money out of nothing. There's just nothing those things do that's valuable. And I don't know why we allow them. And get this. One of the guys at the table, it says here, is one of the quotes from, I figured they would be doing this. It's an old joke. It goes back to the 80s and the Iranian hostage crisis, and therefore probably back into the 70s. It says, Mark says, get this. One of the guys at the table was singing this to the tune of the Beach Boys' Barbara Ann, right? Bomb, 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 Iran. That joke is so old. Obviously, like I said, it goes back to the Iranian hostage crisis. That joke is so old that John McCain told that joke when he was running for president. And he's been dead for a while. So that's how old we're talking. He was old when he did it. He's gone now. It's literally, though, the definition of loose lips sink ships, although they've been sinking planes faster than the ships so far. But these days we're more concerned with the planes anyway. So there you go. It's just par for the course, really. But I thought you might find it interesting. Now, a rather more obscure story. Well, maybe among our crowd, the TMZ story is the more obscure, and you will have seen the more serious story. But it's a weird one. And let's see, where are we looking here? I have to go to Substack. Everyone, please forgive me. I'm clicking through, and Nazis are smiling. I don't know what to tell you, but that's where this thing is. Who am I reading? Jonathan Larson. And you'll never guess what the title of his Substack is. I like it. It keeps it simple. Jonathan Larson's Substack. So excellent. Easy to keep track of. Larsen. If you are wondering and you're looking for it, it's jonathanlarson.substack.com. U.S. troops, you know who they are, right? U.S. troops were told Iran war is for, quote, Armageddon, comma, I love the headline version of this. Iran war is for, quote, Armageddon, comma, return of Jesus. That just, we got to put it matter-of-factly in the headline. What's happening here? I don't know. They're crazy. It starts off also with a picture of Pete Hegseth. They label him here Defense Secretary, which again is weird. By the way, more people, including Dave Weigel this morning, catching on with they changed the name to the Department of War, and they say they got war fighter mentality. But if you ask them if this is a war, the official line is still no. And I know that that's really just, if we say it's a war, then it makes it easier to argue that we need congressional authorization for it. Anyway, here's what they're doing while they have no congressional authorization. A combat unit commander told non-commissioned officers at a briefing on Monday that the Iran war is part of God's plan and that President Donald Trump was, quote, anointed by Jesus to light the signal fire in Iran to cause Armageddon and mark his return to Earth. I didn't even know President Donald Trump wasn't on Earth, although I did get that sense from time to time, thanks to his actions and his social media posting. But as it turns out, the subject of that part of the sentence is Jesus, to mark his return to Earth. That according to a complaint by a non-commissioned officer. Well, all right. There are some weirdos in the military. It's good to keep tabs on these things. You don't want this happening, but is it really a story? It is a story. Is it really a big story if a combat unit commander tells a non-commissioned officer or several non-commissioned officers at a briefing that this is the case? It's worrisome. It's troublesome. Is it bigger than that? Well, of course it is. Duh. You already probably have heard the story. From Saturday morning through Monday night, more than 110 similar complaints about commanders in every branch of the military, even Space Force, I guess that means it. Coast Guard, for God's sake. Coast Space, whatever. Every branch of the military have been logged by the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, or MRFF, the weird acronym, MRF, I guess, but I don't know how they... Well, anyway, the complaints came from more than 40 different units. It's not just one guy. 40 different units spread across at least 30 military installations. The MRF told me on Monday night. Sounds like another podcast, right? TMZ, Harvey and the MRF, Thursdays from Joe Stonecrab. Anyway, the MRF, I'll say the MRFF, is keeping the complainants anonymous to prevent retribution by the Defense Department, whatever that is. I never heard of that department. The Pentagon did not immediately respond to my request for comment, and they probably didn't even let you in. One complainant identified themselves as a non-commissioned officer, or NCO, in a unit currently outside the Iran combat zone, but in ready support status, deployable at any time. The NCO said they were Christian. This is a no gender marker. The NCO said they were Christian and emailed the MRFF on behalf of 15 troops, including at least 11 Christians. We got to tally this now. It's a religious issue. 11 Christians, 1 Muslim, and 1 Jew. Full email printed below. Shall we take a look at it? The NCO wrote to the MRFF that their commander, quote, urged us to tell our troops that this was, quote, all part of God's divine plan, not just his regular mundane everyday shopping list. And he specifically referenced numerous citations out of the book of Revelation, which is it Revelation or Revelations? I don't know. Referring to Armageddon and the imminent return of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ! Yes, I'm on my way. Defense Secretary, or whatever, Pete Hegseth, has enshrined evangelical Christianity at the uppermost levels of the U.S. military, and whiskey. I mean, I guess they go hand in hand. Airing monthly prayer meetings throughout the Pentagon. Oh. Last year, the Pentagon confirmed to me that Hegseth attends a weekly White House Bible study. It's led by a preacher who says God commands America to support Israel. Okay. That preacher is... all right. Well, anyway, I don't know. No speculation there. Monday's email from the NCO said that their commander's remarks, quote, destroy morale and unit cohesion and are in violation of the oaths we swore to support the Constitution. MRFF President and founder Mikey Weinstein, a veteran of the Air Force and the Reagan White House, in case you think he's just some crazy liberal, told me that since the U.S. and Israel attacked Iran early Saturday morning, the MRFF has been inundated with similar complaints. And I quote, these calls have one damn thing in freaking common. He's a Reagan White House guy. Freaking common. Our MRFF clients, that is to say service members who seek MRFF aid, report the unrestricted euphoria of their commanders and command chains as to how this new, quote, biblically sanctioned war is clearly the undeniable sign of the expeditious approach of the fundamentalist Christian end times as vividly described in the New Testament book of Revelation. I guess it is just singular. Okay. Many of the commanders are especially delighted with how graphic this battle will be, zeroing in on how bloody all of this must become in order to fulfill and be in 100% accordance with fundamentalist Christian end-of-the-world eschatology. Wow. Weinstein cited constitutional and uniform code of military justice prohibitions against injecting religious beliefs into official military instruction or messaging. He said, quote, any military member seeking to take advantage of their subordinates by advancing their blood-soaked Christian nationalist wet dreams, holy mackerel, upon the flames of this latest non-congressionally sanctioned attack against Iran should be swiftly, aggressively, and visibly prosecuted. Well, we'll see about that. Weinstein added that the MRFF receives similar complaints about Christian eschatology, end of the world theology. Whenever this stuff here, he abandons the pretense here. He said freaking before, but whenever this stuff blows up with Israel in the Middle East. After the October 7th, 2023 Hamas attack on Israel, for instance, the MRFF reported a complaint about an Air Force commander who said at a briefing that, quote, the war between Israel and Hamas has all been foretold by the book of Revelation and the gospel of Jesus Christ, and no one can do anything about that. Well, after 9/11, President George W. Bush, if you remember that guy, referred to the American, quote, crusade against terrorism, evoking the ancient clashes between Christian crusaders and Muslims. Bush's language was seen as potentially inspiring Muslims to take up arms against the United States if it proclaimed itself a Christian army waging war on Islam. French Foreign Minister, Hubert Védrine said, quote, one has to avoid falling into this huge trap, this monstrous trap, set by al-Qaeda with the 9/11 attacks. Bush dropped the term crusade. But by the way, Pete Hegseth then had it tattooed on his body, right? He's got the Deus Vult tattoo and the Crusader flag tattoo that looks an awful lot like the flag of the state, the country of Georgia. And with good reason, all tattooed on his body. He considers himself a crusader. I mean, we consider him a drunk. He considers himself a crusader. We have differing opinions on that. As I revealed last year, and I guess that's Jonathan Larson speaking, Hegseth sponsors the weekly White House Bible study that preaches support for Israel. It's not just that he attends, he sponsors it. Okay. Some Christians claim biblical prophecy requires Israel to exist for Jesus to return, but Hegseth's Bible study leader, preacher Ralph Drollinger, I don't think we've run into that name before, teaches that the reason to support Israel is that God still blesses Israel's allies and curses Israel's enemies, even though Israel killed Jesus. This smear, this historic root of anti-Semitism, has been rejected by every major religion. All right. That's another thread in the rich tapestry. After Israel's attack on Iran last year, Drollinger dedicated 2 weeks of lessons to preaching support for Israel. His lessons went out to White House cabinet members and members of Congress, even as Israel, too, was lobbying for U.S. engagement. Hegseth has also initiated monthly prayer sessions, most recently featuring Doug Wilson, the far-right Christian nationalist. He's also brought in other preachers from his personal circle, rejecting any attempt at making the meetings ecumenical. Hegseth himself also speaks at these meetings, proselytizing his personal religious beliefs. This is, I think, exactly where we need to be as a nation at this moment, Hegseth reportedly said, in prayer, on bended knee, recognizing the providence of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. While the MRFF historically has been able to get the Pentagon to swat down Christian incursions into the military, the Trump administration is openly disdainful of military norms and law. It remains to be seen whether and how wholesale Christianization of the Iran war will be opposed by officials inside the Pentagon or political and legal advocates for secular values outside of it. So there you go. I think that's important. And I guess, is this the email that got sent? And then they reprint the full statement from Mikey Weinstein, although I think we get the picture. But what's the email saying here? And it redacted the name of where it's coming from. It's dated March 2nd. Mr. Weinstein is who he's addressing here. Thank you for taking my calls and the calls of some of my colleagues as to what happened earlier this morning with our combat unit. Please protect my identity. That makes good sense. Our unit is not currently in the combat zone AOR regarding the Iranian attacks, but we are in a ready support function where we could be deployed there at any moment to join and augment the combat operations as participants, provided there are enough bullets, of course. I am an NCO within our unit. This morning, our commander opened up the combat readiness status briefing by urging us not to be afraid, quote, afraid as to what is happening with our combat operations in Iran right now. That seems okay so far, although that's not usually, I would imagine, probably not the opener among professional military. But anyway, he urged us to tell our troops that this was, quote, all part of God's divine plan, which sometimes can be dismissed as casual, offhand, just plain people who are infused with their Christianity way of saying things, but it gets more specific, obviously. And he specifically referenced numerous citations out of the book of Revelation referring to Armageddon and the imminent return of Jesus Christ. He said that President Trump had been anointed by Jesus. We read that part before. He had a big grin on his face when he said all this, which made his message seem even more crazy. Our commander would probably be described as a Christian first supporter. I don't think I've heard it put that way. He's been this way for a very long time, and it makes it clear that he desires all of us under him to become just like him as a Christian. But what he did this morning was so toxic and so over the line that it shocked many of us in attendance at the ops readiness briefing. Besides myself, I'm reaching out to MRFF on behalf of 15 fellow troops. I know you asked me about the religious views of our group who's requested help from the MRFF. I can only tell you that I'm Christian. At least 10 of the others are also. And one of the others is Jewish. One is Muslim. I don't know the religious or non-religious status of the other 3 at this time. I and my fellow troops know that this is completely wrong to have to suffer through what our commander said today. It's not just separation of church and state, as we discussed, Mr. Weinstein. It's the fact that our commander feels as though he's fully supported and justified by the entire unit's name withheld chain of command to inflict his Armageddon views of our attack on Iran on those of us beneath him in the chain of command. I hope by sending this email to you, you will help expose these wrong actions which destroy morale and unit cohesion and are in violation of the oaths we swore to support the Constitution. And you might imagine that the full statement from Mr. Weinstein is erudite and forceful. But I think you've got the idea at this point. Just something for us to monitor. Not unexpected from this military, but shocking to hear nonetheless. All right. I'm going to do a quick scan to see, while we're on the war subject, whether there's anything else that we really need to turn to before we switch subjects. And I'm not certain that there is. Although this is something I put aside the other day from Talking Points memo, which is tangentially about the war. I guess more psychological examination of the weirdo in the White House and his circle, prerogative powers and presidential self-care, from Josh Marshall himself, who observes briefly that another observation, that's how he observes it, another observation on Trump's attack on Iran. This is just sort of offhand thoughts, probably from Friday. Yes. No, Saturday. Okay. Each of these regime attacks clearly emboldens him. Regime attacks, what do you mean? Oh, yeah, right. To him, the Venezuelan adventure went great. Where was the blowback in terms that he recognizes, right? So why not do it again? That's probably true. Sure, he hasn't actually seized Greenland yet. Beneath the headlines is the intensity of European resistance. Beneath the headlines, the intensity of European resistance clearly mattered a lot, but this Iran attack almost certainly doesn't happen without the Venezuela one. But remember to see this whole escalating series of military adventures in the proper light. Trump is very unpopular and growing more so every day. He now faces what seems close to the certainty of losing at least one house of Congress. As his public support ebbs, his power and the power to dominate ebbs as well. I see. Wait a second. That's a bit of a... But you get the idea. As his public support ebbs, his power and the power to dominate ebb as well. For Trump, that is akin to a psychic death. This wasn't carefully scripted, but it was an offhand observation, I guess. So, as a matter of psychological balancing and self-care more than strategy, He's leaning heavily into the presidential prerogative powers where his power is most untrammeled, where the loss of political power doesn't really matter. Almost no presidential power is more clearly in that character as the president's control over the military. Put simply, he's leaning into those powers as a matter of psychological compensation. That's a theory, something to keep in mind as we're searching for some kind of explanation or some way of predicting some part of Trump's behavior and what trajectory this war might take. As he finds his power constricted by courts in other areas and becomes a bigger and bigger loser politically, he will lean more and more heavily on his role as so-called commander-in-chief of the armed forces. And I'll show you what power is. If you guys won't follow me and courts won't allow me to do these other things I want to do by executive order without interference, then I'll just have some wars. And he may be just dumb enough to do it that way. I don't know. Anyway, the picture illustrating the piece, of course, reminds you just how vacant the space in his head actually is. And whenever they get these pictures of his droopy eyes barely open and him barely paying attention to being president, and it really illustrates the point for me. All right. So now on to other areas. And if we wander back onto war territory somewhere along the line, well, so be it. It may just happen. All right. Other interesting tidbits from around the country and around the world, if you will. A follow-up to our mention the other day, just from reading the story, so we put it on the record, of the move by the Kansas legislature, and I guess driven by Chris Kobach, to invalidate driver's licenses in Kansas held by transgender people, and the weirdness and unfairness and stupidity of the whole thing. We've got an interesting follow-up story. So you remember that the story was that, one, they snuck this thing through the legislature using, a procedural oddity that's available in Congress and elsewhere, I guess, but striking out all of the text of a bill that was already in circulation and replacing it with this really surprise legislation to invalidate these licenses, and apparently then passing the bill in a form that would be effective immediately, and then sending out letters on Monday that by Wednesday or Thursday, all of your licenses will be officially invalid. And the only thing you can do about it is go to the DMV and get a new license. But of course, if you drive there, we might arrest you for driving without a license. You remember that whole story. And at the root of it was, their whole insistence. Well, your official documents, your state-issued license, must have your sex as assigned at birth in accordance with your birth certificate on the license. So if you've transitioned either to a non-binary status or to the opposite gender or what have you, and you've tried to make your license reflect current reality so that if you're ever stopped and asked for identification, people aren't immediately puzzled as to what's going on, but rather say, yeah, this appears to be you, and then things can go on from there. Right. Well, anyway, so they basically were saying, along with a bathroom insistence, that everybody used the bathroom that your birth certificate 20, 30 years ago said you should be using now. You got to go and do that no matter what you look like and how much panic you'll cause. So, all right, it was dumb and cruel and backwards and bound to cause problems, but we understood it. We understood what it was that they were trying to do. Now, now this clarifies it a little bit. If you thought it was, they're trying to be cruel, certainly, but they're aiming at forcing people to change their documentation to, we're going to make them admit the truth, even if they don't believe it's true. We're going to make them admit our truth. Well, as it turns out, it's really just about targeting trans people and making their lives miserable and causing them problems. Because here is the story of a trans woman who never did change her gender marker on her license, and for reasons That is, when the opportunity presented itself, she said, this is going to cause problems if I go back and change it, or if I'm stopped and somebody wants to make problems for me as a trans person, they're going to argue about which marker I should or shouldn't have. Anyway, they obviously insist that my license should say M, even though everything about me says F. Oh, F you, I want it to say F, but okay, fine. F me, I'm going to leave it with an M. Did they invalidate this person's license anyway? You bet. Didn't make a goddamn bit of difference. They wanted that license to say M, and the one that you have right here that says M, why, this is invalid. And you're going to have to come back to our office and get a new one that also says M. Why are we doing this again? Oh, I remember. Cruelty. So, I'm reading from assignedmedia.org, which I guess you could see has double entendre involved. She'd never changed her gender marker. Kansas invalidated her license anyway. A trans Kansas resident recently changed her name, but not her gender marker on her license, fearing what Kansas may do if she did. The Kansas DMV still flagged her ID, and that's because she changed her name, and that they mention is obvious or is indicative of some very close monitoring of the trans community in Kansas. Nate Zook is the name of the reporter here for assignedmedia.org. And as we get ready to exit for the break, we'll give you the lead up here. Andrea Ellis of Wellington, Kansas, was one of many transgender Kansans who opened her mail on February 25th to learn that in less than 24 hours, her driver's license would be invalid. The letter issued by the Kansas Department of Revenue informed her that because House Substitute for Senate Bill 244, or SB 244 in the parlance there, requires Kansas-issued driver's license and identification cards to reflect the credential holder's sex at birth. Her current license would become, quote, invalid immediately on February 26th. Ellis had been following the news closely in the past few months. She knew that the bill was going to be going into effect, but she never expected the state to send her a letter invalidating her license, and that's because she never changed that sex marker on her license in the first place. But too bad. You're one of those people we don't like. We're going to ruin your day. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue reading this story here from Assigned Media. You get the story. Andrea Ellis of Wellington, Kansas, gets the invalidation notice, even though her license still had the M sex marker, because she never bothered to change it. And had made a conscious decision not to change it the last time she had been at the DMV. Ellis last updated her driver's license on January 7th, 2026, after completing a legal name change in December of 2025. Fearing her license would be revoked if she updated her sex marker, she knew even then, she deliberately held off on doing so. I saw the writing on the wall after listening to Kobach's testimony for SB 2426. HB 2426. She said, HB 2426, containing the original transphobic legislation, sponsored by Republican Kansas Representative Susan Humphreys, would later be repurposed as SB 244 using the Kansas State Legislature's gut and go trick. Remember, we discussed that the other day. This allowed legislators to strip the original contents of SB 244, replace it with the contents of HB 2426, and pass SB 244 without giving the public time to weigh in, dodging accountability for the bill's contents. Most bills being passed during this session of the Kansas legislature won't go into effect until July 1st, 2026. That's the usual course. SB 244, however, contains a provision that allowed it to go into effect as soon as it was published in the Kansas Register, the state newspaper of record, on February 26th. Oh, it's a newspaper? Okay. I don't know whether that's like, is that a really a newspaper, or is it just like the Federal Register and they call it a newspaper? All right. Well, let's see. Scott says we're off air as of 10:01. Well, we'll see whether we return to it and see whether I get any note from. We got some messages coming through from Justice, so we'll see. Maybe there's been some disruption, or maybe the Iranians finally found the right data server to blow up over in the Middle East and take us out, at least overseas. All right. Oh, well, message. Here we go. For some reason, stream dropped, but it's picked back up. Looks like it's out in the world. The problem is out in the world. All right. Well, we're all problems for the world. So back to our story here, wherein Andrea Ellis decides that she's got to, well, she changed her name in January and then changed her license to change to show the reflect the name change, but did not elect to or ask to change the gender marker on her license. All right. And then we went through the weird process that the Kansas legislature used to drop this thing on everyone as a surprise. The tactic echoed 2025 when the Kansas legislature made the same maneuver with Senate Bill 63 to ban gender-affirming care for minors in Kansas. Right? So for two particular bills that both dealt with the transgender community, they, one, substituted their language at the last minute so that there could be no public awareness or public hearings about the situation, and two, include provisions making the law effective on enactment rather than waiting for, I guess, the begin. I don't know whether it's a new fiscal year or a new legislative year, July 1st of that year. So in a big hurry to get the thing through, in a big hurry to do it without hearings, and in a big hurry to make it effective in both cases. On February 25th, transgender Kansans like Ellis started receiving letters in the mail informing them that as of February 26th, the next day, their licenses would be rendered invalid. With no grace period, many recipients of these letters found themselves with less than 24 hours to figure out what to do. In a rural state where driving is necessary for most people, Ellis was confused about the letter she received, but felt as though she had no choice but to comply. She spends nearly an hour and a half each day driving to and from her job in Park City. Thursdays are one of her days off, so she didn't have to call out of work on the 26th to go to the DMV. Still, having to suddenly get a new driver's license was extremely inconvenient, as it would be for anyone. Wellington doesn't have a DMV, so when I got the letter in the mail, I had to decide between going to the DMV in Winfield or the DMV in Derby. This will make more sense to Kansans, I'm sure, but you get the idea. Both locations were over 30 minutes away. When Ellis left her house on Thursday morning, her license was officially invalid. She couldn't comply with the new law unless she was able to get to a DMV, but in order to get to the DMV, she was forced to break the law. Every minute she was on the road, she was at risk of being arrested, jailed, or fined. Fortunately, she reached her destination without any trouble. And remember what the issue here is. Yeah, we learned, this is one of the nuances of the bill, right? You got to work it through. I mean, it's not a very nuanced bill, but here's what I mean. Well, we're invalidating the licenses of transgender people because you got to have your sex at birth on your license. Okay, but I do have my sex at birth on my license. Yeah, well, the first part of the sentence was the operative one. We're invalidating the licenses of transgender people. Why? Well, because very frequently they'll have the quote-unquote wrong gender on it. Yeah, but if they don't, what if they have the quote-unquote right gender on it? Sorry. You're collateral damage, I guess. So it was a bill to invalidate the licenses of all transgender people for no particular reason, but the excuse was you might have the wrong gender on there, and if you don't, oh, well, our bad. We're going to start out with it invalid? Yes. Apparently that is the case. So she still has an invalid license. She's compelled to go to the DMV to get a new license that will say what her old license said, but we wanted to bother you. That is pretty crazy, don't you think? Once Ellis arrived at the DMV, she presented the letter to a confused employee. It seems like none of the DMV staff had any idea what was going on. I don't think there was time for them to have any training on how to handle the SB 244 stuff, Ellis said. After presenting her letter, she was forced to surrender the license she had been issued less than 2 months ago and watch the DMV employee cut a large chunk out of it, rendering it officially invalid. Her altered license was returned to her alongside the new temporary paper license. – Both credentials, of course, designated her sex as M, Paper license in hand, Ellis got in her car and started driving northeast to El Dorado, a town roughly 40 minutes away. With a background like mine, I have to do something when there's a crisis going on. I can't just sit still, Ellis said, referencing her past military service and reflecting on her deployments to Afghanistan. And now everybody is supposed to say, thank you for your service. But the people who usually remember right away to say, thank you for your service, found out she was transgender and said, go F yourself. Give me your license. That morning, Equality El Dorado, the town's local LGBTQ plus organization, had posted on Facebook asking for volunteers to help drive trans Kansans to the DMV, as well as cash donations to help people cover the unexpected costs of replacing licenses. Other organizations, such as the LGBTQ Foundation of Kansas, also sprung into action to try and help transgender community members. There are some links here in the article if you would like to see what you might be able to do to help out. Ellis was ready to pitch in once she arrived in El Dorado, but was stopped in her tracks. When she parked her car and checked her phone, she learned the Derby DMV had called her and left a message requesting that she come back to the DMV as soon as she could. Apparently, there was a problem with the new license she had just been issued. She tried to call the DMV back to get more information. No answer to her calls. Frustrated, she got back in the car, canceled a doctor's appointment that she had scheduled for later that afternoon, and resigned herself to the fact that she was going to have to spend the majority of her day off at the DMV, as most people will. The DMV employer had to call a manager over for assistance, and Ellis waited patiently as the DMV staff tried to solve the issue. They probably didn't even know what the hell the issue was. They didn't tell me what the problem was, but I overheard them saying there was a flag tied to my ID in their system that they had to remove. Ellis explained. Eventually, she was given another temporary paper license, just like the license that had been cut up that morning, just like the first temporary paper license she had already been issued as a replacement. And just like her original Alabama birth certificate, the sex marker printed on the newest paper license identified her as M. By the time Ellis met up with me, our writer here, Nate Zook, at Pennant Coffee / Good Company in Wichita, a local queer spot, a coffee shop by day and bar by evening, she'd driven a total of over 131 miles and spent close to 3 hours on the road. Sitting at Pennant, surrounded by pride flag decorations and chatting with the visibly queer and trans staff, it felt surreal to think that we were in one of the worst states in the U.S. to be transgender. But Ellis's story proved the extent the state was willing to go to torment its transgender residents. I had never even changed my sex marker. All I did was change my name in December. So that's the only way they could have flagged me, Ellis said. The fact that Ellis was flagged for her name change alone suggests the state of Kansas is intensely monitoring transgender citizens in a state where changing one's legal sex marker has now been rendered impossible. Ellis's story that even just changing one's name can be enough for a transgender person in Kansas to be identified, targeted, and forced to surrender their legal documents. On February 27, 2026, the ACLU of Kansas announced it would be filing a lawsuit challenging SB 244. However, for the time being, it remains in effect. With the 2026 Kansas gubernatorial election looming large in November, it's extremely concerning to see the way the state is already using its power to not only disenfranchise its citizens, but effectively immobilize them in a state where driving is so essential to daily life. All right. Important update, I thought. I know, it just took us a while to get through. We have to keep an eye on the situation. With everything else going on, we have to keep an eye on this one. And just very interesting and revealing. It was never about what they said it was about. Gee whiz, I can't believe it happened again, right? Okay, well, fair enough. Anyway, I wanted to put that one on the record. And let's see, scrolling down, I think we got all of our top things, almost all of the top things we socked away for today, which only means the backlog remains. One more thing that I added to, let's see, in the last day or so. Well, okay, that's wrong. There's another one about Epstein. But this one is another obscure story. And it turned into a semi-interesting discussion last night on Blue Sky. This one from Anthony Clark Also a Substack. The Last Campaign is the name of his Substack. And he's an interesting fellow, an independent writer. We learned that he is a former Hill staffer, as I am. Priors at Politico Magazine, Bulwark, Daily Beast, Salon, Time, Daily News, History Network. You get the idea. He's written for all sorts. All sorts, not all. Politico, Bulwark, Daily Beast. But okay. You get the idea. Bit of a normie. That's fine. This is an interesting note, nonetheless. It's interesting news. We got to keep track of it, even though he approaches it a little bit differently than I do. Breaking. Trump nominates Bradford P. Wilson as archivist, right? The National Archives and the important work that goes on at National Archives and Records Administration, NARA in full name. The ultra-conservative who does not meet the qualifications belongs to anti-gay and, quote, traditionalist organizations. Anthony reports. President Donald Trump today, which I guess means yesterday, nominated Bradford P. Wilson to the position of Archivist of the United States, a statutorily nonpartisan position, leading the independent federal agency, of which there are none left, of course, the National Archives and Records Administration. The office has been vacant for more than a year since Trump fired then archivist Colleen Shogan without cause, nor the required notification to Congress. I believe the claim is that Marco Rubio, I think, is the acting archivist of the United States at this moment. Anyway, that got mentioned in the conversation online about the whole subject. Somebody mentioned that and rang a bell. I guess that's probably because it rang a bell. We'll say it's true. I might have the wrong acting person, but I think they made Marco Rubio acting just about everything, right? Wilson was most recently and we're talking about Bradford P. Wilson. Wilson was most recently the James Wilson Distinguished Visiting Scholar in the Center for Constitutional Studies at Utah Valley University. I'm just kind of curious. Is James Wilson related to Bradford P. Wilson? Is that how he got to be the visiting distinguished scholar? I mean, there's a lot of Wilsons out there, including the volleyball guy that was stranded on the desert island. But I don't think they're related either. He served earlier as executive director of the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions at Princeton University. I've heard of that one. Utah Valley University. I'm sure it's a fine place. That isn't where Charlie Kirk was shot, was it? I mean, there would be no reason to tie the two of those things together, but I thought I hadn't heard of it, and maybe I have. I don't know. Do you want to look? I'm going to look that up. I know this is not the best use of our on-air time, but I'm a little bit curious now. Let's see. Is that where Charlie Kirk? Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, let's see. I got to look at the. Yep. Utah Valley University. All right. Well, that's interesting. It has nothing to do with his work there, I guess. Probably. I can't see how it would have anything to do with his work as the James Wilson Distinguished Visiting Scholar in the Center for Constitutional Studies there. But there you have it. Now, back to the story. Federal law requires that any nominee to the archivist's job have, quote, the professional qualifications required to perform the duties and responsibilities of the office of archivist. I don't know if there's a definition of those things anywhere, but that's what it says in the federal law in question, which is linked here, 44 U.S. Code Section 2103. In case you were wondering, the archivist of the United States shall be appointed by the president with and by the advice and consent of the Senate, shall be appointed without regard to political affiliations and solely on the basis of the professional qualifications required to perform the duties and responsibilities and office of the archivist. And I guess they're linked herein as well. The archivist may be removed from office by the president. The president shall communicate for reasons for any such removal to each house of Congress. But he didn't do that. Okay. Are any of these links to what those qualifications might be? I don't know. That I don't see, but I'm sure it's available. But more to the point, according to publicly available information, Wilson has no experience in the federal government, nor in leading any large organizations, nor executive administrative experience that would qualify someone to lead a complex, widely distributed, independent federal agency such as NARA. Wilson also appears to have no relevant required professional qualifications in archives, federal records, or any directly related field. But Wilson does have a long record in ultra-conservative academia and, quote, traditionalist organizations. He's a senior research fellow in the anti-LGBTQIA+, that's got it all in there, Witherspoon Institute. All these institutes. And Wilson is president of the Association for the Study of Free Institutions, which seeks to counter what it is seen as progressive trends in education. Wilson is also on the advisory council of the Great Hearts Institute, a charter school organization. I got to get on some boards. People need to put me on their boards. I want to be on these institutes and everything. I've got nothing. People ask me what I do, and I say, I do this nice radio show and a podcast. I guess it's a live stream also, the kids say. And well, so what are you exactly? Well, I don't know. This is what I do. But I'm not on any boards. People need to put me on boards. Everybody, please put me on your boards so I can point to all those things. All right. Anyway, the same federal law requires that the nominee be appointed, quote, without regard to political affiliations. This is Anthony Clark. He's online on Blue Sky as Tony Clark. As I reported last year, earlier partisan archivists significantly damaged NARA, federal record keeping, and most importantly, agency staff. The position requires Senate confirmation. The Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee has primary jurisdiction over the National Archives and would consider the nomination. At the time of publication, yesterday, the committee had not scheduled a confirmation hearing, but it would be a little early if the nomination was just made yesterday, too. Anyway, Tony, it appears, is something of an expert in the NARA structure and jurisdiction. What was interesting to me about the story was, when I spotted it, I was like, oh, you mean the archivist? Trump is going to nominate a ultra-conservative partisan to an office that's supposed to be nonpartisan. And, lots of things go on at the National Archives and Records Administration, and Tony knows the structure, and so he's more concerned with substantive issue areas where the archivists' input and discretion that they're actually entitled to exercise in the office would screw things up. And that would be the most direct, I guess you'd have to admit, that's the most direct impact and the most worrisome thing about naming an ultra-partisan to a job like this. What struck me, of course, what do I know about the archivist? I encounter the archivist only in the context of 2020's effort to just simply steal and misreport the results of the Electoral College voting. When we were trying to game out in late 2020, what is this stupid plan that people say is circulating among Republicans to bring fake Electoral College certificates? So I don't think we even knew that was necessarily the game, but it had to be part of the game. That's what we reasoned out. How are you going to challenge the proceedings on January 6th, 2021, such that you end up with Donald Trump as president? And we had to posit that the only way you could do that is, one, you would have to be challenging the validity of the actual outcome of the Electoral College voting. But two, you could presumably, what would you point to that would say Trump is president? If you could invalidate the votes for Joe Biden, it still wouldn't change the fact that there aren't 270 electoral votes for Donald Trump. So was the game to throw out the majority Electoral College votes such that nobody had a working majority, and then allow the House to elect the president according to the constitutional outline, and that because Republicans controlled more state delegations, they would elect Donald Trump president? That was one possibility. But then I guess something must have told us, we must have gotten tipped off at some point that they actually thought, oh, well, we think that there was cheating in the popular vote, therefore cheating in the electoral voting as well, and we're going to convene our own electors and send our own certificates to the Congress. And we went through all the mechanics of it, like, well, what does that mean, and how do you actually comply with the statute to report your electoral college results? Remember, if you were a longtime listener, you heard us go through this, that you have to send a copy of your electoral college certificates to the president of the Senate, that's the vice president, and to the National Archives, and to the ranking federal judge in your court district, all sorts of things. And all of these, the reason for the redundancy is sort of like anti-forgery and redundancy in itself, should the certificates be lost or destroyed or stolen by rioters, or an opposite, an opposing set shows up, and you got to determine the validity. So my exposure to the archivist's office was, well, this is just one of those places where you park copies of the electoral college voting certificates for reasons. And in a normal year, those reasons never come into play. Nobody disputes the validity of the certificates that Congress is examining. But Congress does examine them, and they make the determination as to whether or not they are genuine and regular in form and ought to be listened to in the initial stages of things. And usually it goes no further than that. Anyway, that came to my attention. So you mean they're putting an ultra-partisan in office at the archives, where they receive one of these copies and store them and process them if they are regular and valid. Now, we didn't really ask the question of what happens. What does the archivist do if he gets fake ones? And now actually we kind of know the story. The archivist did receive fake ones. They actually read the statutes and said, we need to send copies of these fake certificates not only to Ron Johnson to try to sneak them under the floor and ask Mike Pence to read them, but send some to the archivist too, if we're going to pretend that they're real. I don't know whether they remembered to send any to the local federal judges or not. But anyway, I guess in gaming it all out, like we said, okay, if you have fake certificates, one, how are you going to get them on the floor? I don't know. I guess someone could smuggle them in. We didn't know who would do it. Turns out to be Ron Johnson. And then, of course, you got to get the agreement of the vice president to actually read those things and say, yeah, they're real, and I'm going to hand them to the tellers. Then you would have to have the agreement of the tellers, and you wouldn't have gotten that from the Democratic tellers, because there have to be Democratic tellers. They would have said, no, these certificates don't look regular in form. Of course, the certificates could have gone to a Republican to examine. They take turns. Well, these do seem regular in form. There would be a dispute about that. You'd fight about that. One of the things you could do to try to settle the issue, if you really thought there was a genuine dispute, is you could say, hey, archivist, we have these fake certificates in front of us. These things are crazy, and they're not real. What's the deal? And the archivist could say, you're right, these are forgeries. Or they could say, you're wrong, they're real, I have a similar copy. Or they could, sort of take the neutral position. I have a copy of the same one, and I'm not going to tell you whether they're real or not real. And that's kind of what this one did. They scanned it and put it up on the National Archives site and everything, right? So anyway, all of these things were tied up in our examination of what the archivist did. Now, Rosalind McGregor is messaging me pretty much with the same thing that Tony was messaging about. There's lots of other things that the archivist does. And Tony was a little perturbed, like, yeah, it's true. Well, anybody can, cause problems in the federal government if they are bad actors. They're supposed to be nonpartisan, and the handling of the electoral college votes is a purely ministerial function for the archivist. It's really not a huge part of what they do. There really wouldn't be any opportunity for the archivist to manipulate the outcome of the electoral college vote, because it is Congress that in the first instance, makes the examination, decides whether or not the certificates are genuine and regular in form, and then whether or not to accept them, and then nominates a president and elects them based on the Electoral College certificates that they get. And all of that is true. But I don't know. For some reason, that really bothered Tony that I would focus on that when there are so many other things that the archivist could do directly. And Rosalind has hit on a couple of those, and we'll share them after the break. But I don't know. For some reason, it was really weird for him to raise the alarm about the archivist being ultra partisan, and a bad actor could do any number of bad things. And I said, well, one of the things that I'm interested in that they could do that's bad is this. No. You don't understand. They could never do that. It's merely ministerial. They would have to just report the results. Well, they wouldn't just have to. They could do the other thing. And if you're raising the alarm, allow other alarms to go off.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So, as I was in the middle of explaining, there's an awful lot more that the archivist does than just handling the Electoral College certificates, and they really don't have a great role to play in the Electoral College determination. But I don't know, this really disturbed Tony Clark to no end. Kept him up all night, apparently, which is a little bit ridiculous. And I mean, the problem that we were having was Tony Clark has done, I gather, some very thorough study of the entirety of the job of the archivist and the National Records Administration, and was trying to point out all the other things that a mischievous and partisan archivist could do. And it's all true, and it doesn't interest me at the moment in the least, because I was focused on something completely different. But he wanted the focus to be on other things. This is a little bit more far-fetched. And it is true. But I was just saying, one, that's the problem we were having was he's made this thorough study of NARA and has these other things to say about what the problems are. My interest in NARA was glancing at best, but that's what was on my mind. And that's the observation that came to mind when I heard that they had nominated this ultra partisan. And it's not invalid to worry about something that's of interest to you, so long as you don't attempt to invalidate the very valid interests of others. And I don't care either. But anyway, this has really disturbed him. But anyway, so you can find him on Blue Sky and read all about it. And I don't know, he goes into great detail about the number of presidential libraries that they oversee and the publication of the Federal Register. And all of these things are extremely important and true. And one of the other things that is extremely important and true, but I wonder whether Tony would dispute any of it because of the ministerial function issue. But one of the other reasons we brought up discussion as Rosalind, and the mention of Rosalind probably reminded longtime listeners, is that it was the archivist that activists and Senator Gillibrand Did you say Gillibrand or Gillibrand? I don't even know now that I think about it. Anyway, activists, including Rosalind, sent us a lot of information, and we shared it on the air at the time about the publication of what should be the 28th Amendment to the Constitution. Do I have the number right? I'll look at Rosalind's message here. The 28th Amendment, the Equal Rights Amendment. And do you remember that there was some controversy about, one, the fact that the amendment allegedly carried with it instructions as it was distributed to the states for ratification, that the ratification had to be done by a time certain, even though other amendments have been ratified over much longer periods of time. But this one had that instruction, and it was a question about whether or not that instruction was legally severable from the substance of the amendment, which would be establishing the equal rights of the genders in the United States. And that with, I believe it was Virginia, right? Virginia's ratification of the ERA at a later date provided the requisite number of states ratifying or purporting to ratify the 28th Amendment. And so it was a question of whether or not then the archivist of the United States would publish the contents of the amendment and promulgate it as a duly adopted, duly ratified amendment to the Constitution. And there was a legal argument why that ought to be what happened, but we hadn't hashed it out in court, I don't think, as to whether or not it was the correct and ultimate interpretation. That part of it I'm a little bit still fuzzy on at this point, but Rosalind probably knows it inside and out. But it was the archivist that everybody was looking to exercise that discretionary power to publish this thing and say, it's my interpretation that this is adopted and now legally a part of the Constitution. You could see that that's fraught for a nonpartisan position, since, of course, it became a partisan argument. Why? I don't know, but mostly, I guess, just Republican misogyny, I suppose. It wasn't going to change the outcome of any elections anywhere. But anyway, they found themselves opposed to it and insisted that it not be published. But then also traditionalists, I guess, among narrow watchers, said, well, it's not really up to the archivist to make this determination about whether or not the time limitation is severable from the substance. That really has to be done by a court. Of course, it would be done by a court if the archivist said, well, I'm publishing it. And if the court doesn't want it want to validate the publication, it can take up the case. Someone will sue. You'll have a chance to do it, and it'll be just fine. But I don't know. They didn't go that way, for one thing. And for another, I'm sure that traditionalists like Tony Clark would be up in arms about the idea that the archivists should take this active role all upon themselves, sua sponte, as it were. Anyway, but Tony's got a lot of very good information about the various other ways that the archivist can impact things, up to and including, like we said, the publication of the Federal Register. There's a role that the archivist plays that's much more straightforward than the weird behind-the-scenes role that they could play in simply, let's say, my imagination of what they would do in the Electoral College case is simply stand by as a backup. If things go Trump's way in the arguments in his inner circle in late 2020, early 2021, and they do, in fact, convince Pence that he should accept a different set of Electoral College votes, or declare that there's a dispute and throw it to debate of the two houses, and break up the joint session and send them back to debate it. That's what Trump was asking him to do. And remember that he, one, refused, and two, that there was the argument, you don't have the power to make that decision about whether or not one or the other of the certificates is valid. You have a merely ministerial function at best to report that there's two sets, but you really ought not even to be doing that. These are obviously forged and these are not. But okay, you could argue, all right, well, as a purely ministerial function, you'll report that you've received two, and you won't be making a determination as to which of the two are valid, and you're going to allow the houses to debate that. So that's this fallback position that Trump wanted Pence to take. But I'm just pointing out, I don't know, Tony thought it was like really ridiculous to even think about somebody messing with the ministerial function that the archivist had. And anyway, it doesn't even matter since Congress is making the first determination. But I'm just saying Pence had a ministerial role there too, and it took some persuading to get him to fulfill it in a manner consistent with what we had wanted, what defenders of democracy wanted versus what his president wanted. He wanted him to say, yeah, ministerial, right? Just do the wrong ministerial thing. He'll call it the right thing, but it was the wrong thing. Anyway, if there was such a dispute or Pence had decided, I'm not going to say one way or another, there's going to be an argument, a debate in the two houses about which set of certificates to accept. Surely at some point in the debate, someone would have said, but these are forged. They're fake. We can't accept them. And someone like Ted Cruz would be saying, well, if they're forged, then surely they wouldn't be on file. Certainly the National Archivist would have something to say about that. Archivist, did you get these copies? Like, that would be one thing. If those forged ones showed up at Congress but weren't on file with the archivist and weren't on file with the federal judges in each of the districts, that would probably, I'm sure partisan Republicans in the Senate and the House would have ignored that and said, it doesn't matter, we can press forward. That's a stupid requirement of the law. Who cares about that? But there would be others that would say, well, look, valid certificates of the vote in the Electoral College will have been filed at these places. Do these places have them? If the answer is no, that closes the question for at least some of the honest brokers, if there were any left. But if they were able to point and say, well, the archivist does have them. Now, that doesn't establish their validity, but it does give you the opportunity to say, well, they were filed regularly, even if they're a little hinky looking and they don't have seals on them, or they're not signed by the governor or whatever, but you get over the first hurdle, and that might be all it takes to get some of the reluctant Republicans on board. Or, of course, the archivist could say more than, I have them, and that's all I'm saying. They could say, I have them, and I find them to be regular in form and valid. A lie, a partisan lie, but would it be enough for Republicans in Congress to say, don't take my word for it that I think they're regular in form and valid. The archivist of the United States of America just happens to agree. I mean, come on, what are the odds? It doesn't matter that the role is ministerial. It doesn't matter that it would be a highly partisan decision. It doesn't matter that it's not a decision that the archivist should or shouldn't be involving themselves in. What mattered to me was, could the archivist point to these things and say, I think they're valid. I think you should think they're valid. Yeah, but you're just supposed to be ministerial here. Yeah, but I'm not being ministerial. What are you going to do? All right. I mean, that's the mischievous role that they can play. Are there more direct ways to impact things? Absolutely. They're the ones in the publication of the Federal Register. This is the part we all forget about with legislation. We can tell you all about the process of how you get to a vote on these things. We've told you a little bit sometimes about what happens in between the voting in both houses and the dispatching of these materials either from one house to another or off to the White House to be signed. We've learned about what happens when the president signs them. They become law. Well, we're skipping a step. We don't usually talk much about the publication of those laws. Like, he signs it, and then what? Is there supposed to be a publication of the law, a promulgation of the law, and then, of course, subsequent to that, there's the administrative task of finding ways the appropriate departments of jurisdiction will promulgate rules in accordance with the law and then publish those in the Federal Register also. But this is the way at ground level the law will be interpreted and enforced. And all of that gets published in the Federal Register. And it will be to the Federal Register that judges and the rest of officialdom involved in adjudicating the validity of these laws in courts will turn. Yeah, I say, Your Honor, this is clearly unconstitutional. What is unconstitutional? What are you talking about? Well, this new law is. Show me the law. All right, well, here it is. It's the bill that was debated. No. I need the Federal Register's publication of the law and of, show me where is it in the code? Cite it to the code. If it hasn't been, assigned a number yet because it's so brand new, there are ways around that too. You'll have to show me what we're talking about. But you need to show me that. But this is the examination that will be undertaken in court cases at any time. Did it get presented to both houses of Congress in the same form? Was it presented to the president for signature in the same form? Were the rules that were debating the interpretation of the law promulgated properly in the Federal Register, etc.? And that's where the archivist has leverage to do things directly that they can do in good faith or bad faith. Oh, I printed the wrong instructions? Oh, no. Does it come down to that? Well, with Trump and paperwork, sometimes it does. So anyway, the point is that Tony Clark will tell you all the ways that an archivist can directly impact very important functions in the country if he's a partisan figure. And he can tell you the history of trying to install partisan figures there, too. So those will be the primary dangers. The one that occurred to me was, he could provide some annoying and obviously BS backup to a scheme to steal the Electoral College, not now, but in 3 years hence. And that just happens to be of interest to me. It's not of interest to Tony Clark, but it doesn't have to be in order for it to be true, basically, is where we're going with all this. All right. I thought that was of some interest, and perhaps you'll like to read about that and read about all of the minute details of what the archivist does in his recitation of them online. I won't bother you with them at the moment. We'll move on to some other things, including, let's see. Oh, yes. Right. Do you remember that we discussed the other day, there was some developments in the Epstein story that we didn't entirely finish with. And I'm trying to think about how we can move to them or whether we save Epstein for another day entirely. And perhaps we can, because it's an ever-present background story at this point, and it plays into everything and ties into everything, but not always necessary for us to spend time with it each morning, I guess. What was I going to take a look at here? Oh, here, just to bring things back to the Gulf War in an unexpected way. I did open this story this morning, and I hadn't put it in Instapaper, and I left it the tab open here from Wired, which is always a fun place to be reading things. And maybe I do need to put it in Instapaper and see if I can read the whole thing. But it might not be necessary to do that. Maybe just the headline will give you the gist of what's going on here. Missile attacks are overwhelming the Gulf. We've heard about that. Only 7% of those things getting through, of course, because of the 93% hit rate that we read about earlier today in the UAE. Missile attacks still overwhelming the Gulf, though. Things are blowing up, apartment buildings, hospitals. I imagine. Oh, well, in Iran, they're certainly blowing up the hospitals. But apartment buildings and military installations and some prestige targets in these prestige cities around the Gulf. But here's an interesting point. Delivery drivers are still on the roads. And this, I guess, goes back to maybe in a certain way to the weirdo, affluent influencers who are writing some or blogging, video blogging from the Gulf cities, bragging on the wonderful conditions there and how beautiful it was anyway a couple of months ago. And now they're, of course, all trying to flee the country. And those who can't flee the country because there are no planes available and all the flights are grounded are facing all sorts of difficulties. And I guess one of the difficulties is I'm afraid to go out and get food because there's missiles, raining down from the sky everywhere. And that seems like a valid fear, but consistent with the nature of Dubai and essentially how it is built with slave or near slave labor and basically should be considered a slave state. And if it's okay with you that you can leave your 3 iPhones on the hood because anybody who might have an interest in stealing it knows that they'll have their hands chopped off. If that doubles as security for you, then fine. But anyway, I guess in your fear of going out to get your own food, and maybe you were never going out and getting your own food anyway, you were having Uber deliver it or DoorDash deliver it. And now, of course, you need some expendable lives to make sure that they can still get your restaurant order to you. And the slave labor in Dubai, or the very low-paid, low-wage labor in Dubai, will take care of that for you, even in the middle of missile attacks. Missile and drone attacks have disrupted daily life, but delivery drivers are still diligently navigating streets to drop off orders across the region. And guess who those orders are probably for? And I wonder what they're ordering. What are they eating these days? Even with flight delays, missile alerts, and the sound of interceptions overhead, third-party delivery apps like Careem, with a C, interesting, have mostly kept running through the ongoing conflict in the Gulf region. Deliveries are slower, some areas are paused, and routes change, but the apps have not shut down their services. Many delivery platforms went down briefly in the UAE on Saturday, immediately after the first attacks, but quickly came back online. That may have something to do with the fact that some of the original targets were the data centers in these fabulously wealthy and totally online cities, up to and including, I guess, some of the new data centers under construction with the NVIDIA chips that have made their way into UAE hands after many years of prohibiting such transfers. But the Iranians knew how to get their money's worth out of their attacks on these cities of the future. Anyway, companies say that they're making sure people can still get essentials and that life feels as normal as possible. If, normal means having 3 iPhones and leaving it on, and a Van Cleef necklace and leaving them on the hood of your Bentley and getting people to deliver food to you. In a statement shared with Wired Middle East, Careem said that it is assessing the safety of our operations area by area and in real time, providing immediate safety updates and guidance with drivers, whom the company calls captains, over WhatsApp groups and SMS. We have reinforced to all our partners that captains are not required to be online if they have concerns about doing so, the statement continued. The UAE Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratization. I'm not certain what that word would even mean. I get the idea of the construction, but Ministry of Human Resources I get. Emiratization. Is that like where you would get, if not naturalized, where you would get a work permit? Is that the idea? Emiratize yourself so that you can work? Well, they've recommended that remote work is the option for the private sector from March 1st to March 3rd, that's today, except for essential work requiring physical presence. And that means bringing tacos to wealthy expatriates living in Dubai, but only because they can't escape at the moment. An Uber spokesperson confirmed that the company's services, including Uber Eats, are fully operational in the region. The safety and well-being of our riders and partner drivers is our core priority. We are monitoring the situation in real time and will continue to operate in a strict alignment with all local government recommendations. A statement sent to Wired Middle East read, every delivery platform that provided a statement echoed this sentiment. The decision to keep services running has sparked debate online. Critics point out that delivery riders are being put at risk. Even if most missiles are stopped using missile interception systems, those interceptions can still mean falling debris or road hazards. The Ministry of Defense has reported 3 deaths and 58 injuries in the UAE since the attacks began on February 28th. Others say that not ordering means drivers spend more time outside, in danger, to meet their daily quotas. Others say that not ordering. One driver for popular delivery platform Deliveroo explained that he works for a third-party logistics agency which provides drivers to Deliveroo. Boy, nobody works for anybody anymore. It's like no one wants to work for anybody directly. Anyway, he spoke on condition of anonymity. Of course, if he refuses to work, he says the agency fines him. This also applies if he doesn't meet his daily quota for deliveries. Drivers for most delivery platforms receive a basic salary and a fee for each delivery completed, providing an incentive to deliver as many meals as possible. Uber's delivery service pays for every pickup and drop-off, as well as a per-mile rate, along with any tips given by customers. In some cities, drivers also get a per-minute rate. This means that refusing to take an order has a direct impact on earnings. The driver for Deliveroo added that he has not received any safety guidelines or advice from the company with regards to ongoing missile and drone strikes. Delivery apps, of course, also bring groceries, medicine, and other supplies to people staying inside. Kareem noted a surge in demand for pantry staples, including water. Oh, in the desert? Really? Rice, pasta, and fresh produce. Oh, in the desert? Really? According to the UN's International Labour Organization, delivery drivers are essential workers, playing a crucial role in ensuring that residents have access to food, medicine, and daily necessities, and especially during times of crisis. That shift happened, of course, during the COVID pandemic in 2020, as social distancing and quarantines made e-commerce indispensable and transport drivers were deemed essential workers. During the pandemic, which is still ongoing, countries created lists of services that were needed so it could continue operating, and most countries included activities safeguarding access to food, water, electricity, sanitation, healthcare, and ensuring public order. The ILO wrote, the provision of such goods and services, however, implied that other activities came into the fold given their involvement in such provision, and that includes drivers for delivery apps. While the term essential worker was popularized during the 2020 pandemic, the concept has existed for centuries. As the plague spread through Europe, certain jobs, like digging graves, were considered essential. During the Spanish flu, rice farming was prioritized to avoid famine. In modern society, essential takes on a new meaning. Keeping these services running is part of what helps maintain normalcy and avoid panic buying or empty shelves, though it comes with risks borne mostly by migrant workers. Interesting, well worth pointing out, probably easily imagined in all of this. And then, of course, given that the wealthy influencers are going to want specialty meals from high-end restaurants, well, essential, we're delivering rice and water and, fresh produce. Let's throw that in there, too. It's nice if you can get it in a desert. But, the Wolfgang Puck pizzas, I don't know. We'll see how essential that is. But, of course, I suppose if you're that kind of influencer, you're going to consider that to be an essential nonetheless. All right. Lots of other things going on here, but running out of time. And pretty much at the end of today's session, before I hand things over to Justice Putnam for, of course, our usual follow-up, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, trying to see whether there's anything else we need to squeeze in that can really just get a mention here before we cut out for the day. All right, well, one of these days we'll have to go back and read through the details of that weird draft executive order that Trump still threatens to issue to quote-unquote federalize or take over the elections in advance of these 2026 midterms, just so you get some idea of how crazy it is. We got an idea of who the roster of weirdos is that is working on this memo and trying to convince Trump to promulgate it as an executive order. But the contents themselves of the arguments made, I am told, will probably floor you. All right. Time now, as I mentioned, to hand things over then to Justice Putnam. He's got his whole summary ready, and we've got plenty of time to read it, so let's make use of it for once. Starting off in the Bistro Cafe, Trump lost a major redistricting case in a devastating blow to his efforts to sabotage the midterms, so he'll be looking for other opportunities to do that. I'd say probably also through the archivist, even if Tony Clark does not. But that won't be effective in the midterms, will it? No, probably not. Although the archivist probably also stores the certificates of election forwarded by the states to the clerk of the House. I'm sure the clerk stores them, but I wonder if the archivist does too. Anyway, then on the rest of the menu, Idaho considers an apocalyptic choice for disabled people and their families. Oh, we got to check what that one is. No hint here, but the Trump administration eliminated healthcare positions left vacant after a wave of resignations and retirements at the VA last year. And Minnesota launched an investigation that could bring charges against federal immigration officers. See if you can guess who those officers might be. After his break, he moves to the section known as the Chef's Table. I'll tell you what's coming up in that after this message.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Ah, yes, one of the key elements of the war reporting for the day that I forgot about. Trump has been urging stranded U.S. citizens and diplomatic workers in more than a dozen countries to leave, but he's not sending any planes or ships to help after major airlines suspended flights, though he did send a military plane to pick up the hockey team. There is always that. See you tomorrow.